This is the
legs. Quarterback's legs.
Fakes left, now taken off. Gonna run for it, he got it! And there he goes! Inside the 10, the 5. Oh, the play of the year in the NFL! Quarterback legs it was.
I said no spy on this play. I can't believe it. The rare mistake by Kansas City. There's times.
Hey guys, Eric Smith here, 5 Reasons sports contributor, also co-host of Scouting the Fins with Hassan Patel and Eric Wiedeke. You can find that on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel, also the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed. And I've also started doing Wednesday morning live question and answer sessions on my YouTube channel at OL Coach Smith 63 with Anthony Testino, and those are typically at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Want to do something a little different for the bye week. Not going to have any film review in this video, and instead we are going to take somewhat of a mid-season review of my grades for the individuals on the Miami Dolphins offensive line. And first, I wanted to kind of go over my grading system and why context is important. The biggest thing to keep in mind when looking at any grading, but specifically on the offensive line, is that nobody outside of the building knows exactly what's being asked, right? We don't know hand placement. We don't know landmarks. We are, guessing in a lot of ways. It could be the techniques, the different adjustments to the blitzes. We don't know 100%. So we're all making educated guesses on what we think that the offensive line is doing. So I would say that more important than the grades themselves is the ability to trust the opinion of who is doing that grading. And, that's why I try to provide video both here on YouTube and also on X. I want to be able to add to my credibility. And if you're watching this video, then you probably trust my opinion at least somewhat. And while I may get some plays wrong in the grading, I'm pretty confident in my process and my ability to back it up with the metrics that I've created and I can reference back to instead of, just going off of memory that might be skewed by certain really good or really bad plays. For each play, I record the drive number, the play concept, the direction that concept is going in, and whether it's a run versus a pass, right? And some of those concepts, play action, for example, can overlap and, exist on both the run and the pass list. I also mark who the 5 offensive linemen are. This year, thankfully, it's been a lot easier because they've been pretty consistent for a while now. And then I give each of those linemen a grade. And talking about those grades, sometimes a grade can be blank, right? So, for example, a play where it's a pass, and due to the rush scheme, the offensive lineman never has to engage in anybody with a defender. Those are just left blank, and they're not counted into the grades. I'm not going to say that they did anything good or bad when they almost literally did nothing at all. A 1 in the grade would be they did their job to a satisfactory or higher level. I don't give any bonus points for a pancake. This system values consistency over the flash plays for offensive linemen. There's also a 0.5. Right? And this would be, there's room to improve, but it wasn't bad enough to ruin the play. Maybe it's in pass protection, you're giving up a pressure, or maybe a block where the running back in the run game had to do something, a little bit outside the normal to gain yards. And then the final grade would be a 0. And that is a loss that is so bad that it could have ruined the play. And this doesn't always mean the play was ruined. Sometimes it's just that the execution by that individual was so bad that, maybe the quarterback gets the ball out before a defender gets there on a pass play. Or maybe it's a complete whiff in the run game, but the ball was going to a different gap completely. It's stuff like that that would get you a 0. And then once the entire game is complete, the grading for it, I take the sum of those grades and I divide it by the count of those grades. And like I said earlier, some of those can be blank, so the count for each individual offensive lineman can be a little different even if they all played the same number of snaps in the game. And that gives us the raw grade. Currently, based on performances over the past, season and a half, because that's what I have in my database right now, the average raw grade is 93.15. And there was a time when I would, just share those grades, but I got a lot of pushback because it was getting compared to an academic grade. So where a raw grade of 85 for me today is technically below a zero, it's just that bad, it's still a passing grade in an academic sense. So last season, I converted that to a 0 to 10 scale, and the response was better, but it still wasn't quite what I was looking for. So I reworked how the grades were converted for this season. When I run the utility that generates the converted grades, the idea was to make an average grade on a 0 to 10 scale where 5.00 is average, exactly. So the first thing that it does, I remove a certain percentage of the highest graded plays and a certain percentage of the lowest graded plays. Those would be the outliers, right? And this is more important to the low end of the scale, but I wanted to make sure I was being fair to both ends of the spectrum. So I take away the highest graded and the lowest graded um, over the course of that year and a half that we have currently. And without getting too much further into the weeds of that part, from here, a raw grade of 93.15 with the outliers removed is the average. And the highest grade with the outliers removed is a 98.21. So it is possible to grade at a 10.00 in this grading system without being completely perfect from a raw grade perspective. Those converted grades are what I share on the PowerPoint slides every week in my grading. And it might sound complex, but when you really break it down, it's pretty straightforward process, and that's both a benefit and also an issue. It's a benefit because I can explain the process. The evaluation of the play may require some experience, but the raw grading is not complicated. The conversion is not complicated. It's a system that values consistency most, which I think is important for offensive linemen. And we all know that a handful of bad plays per game can be the difference between a Pro Bowl lineman and a practice squad player. But that doesn't mean that this grading system is without its issues. Because every play is weighted the same, you'll find that interior players, especially centers, will tend to grade a little better than the tackles. And tackles are who are being asked to play in space more, and they typically have tougher assignments. Physically, we don't really, weigh the mental part of the center's game. The tackles tend to have a little more room for error there. So, and as the database for the grades grows more, I may look to start to separate the players by position for a slightly more accurate representation, but we're not there yet with the volume that we have. I also don't put any weight on the difficulty of the block. There might be a little bit of leniency, when I'm actually doing the grading, depending on what they look like they're being asked to do. But when you look at the grades, you can't tell if a tackle was trying to block a wide 9 on the front side of an outside zone, or a center was just trying to block back on a 1 technique on a run to the outside. Those are two very different blocks. And when you're looking at what they're asked to do, they should be looked at differently, but we just don't have that in this grading system yet. And that's another one that I may look to enhance to some degree in the future, but I also don't want to overcomplicate the grading system to the point where it becomes difficult to defend, because it's easy to say that it's a harder block or an easier block, but it gets more complicated when you start asking how much do you weigh one versus the other. So all that out of the way, you're probably here for how the individuals on this Dolphins offensive line have performed, more than you're here for the background of my grading system. So we are going to start from the inside out. We're going to talk about the center first, Aaron Brewer, and then the guards, Cole Strange and Jonah Savaiinaya. And then we'll finish up with the tackles, Larry Borum and Patrick Paul. The idea here is to share where their grade is overall, where it is in the pass and the run game, and then kind of highlight the areas for each of these players, where they perform better and where they need to improve, to give you some stuff to watch as we move forward into the final stretch of this season. All right, first off, let's talk about Aaron Brewer. So his overall grade comes in at a 6.96, so almost a 7. And a 7 is a really good grade in this system. When we look at his pass block grade and his run block grade, they are 7.11 and 7.13 respectively. And you might ask, how can both of those be higher than his overall grade? Well, you've got penalties that are factored in those grades as well. So you may have a false start, for example, would be a play that is not a run or a pass, but we're still going to ding Aaron Brewer for that, and it can bring his overall grade down a little more. When we look at the pass blocking side of things, whether he's moving to the left or the right really doesn't make much of a difference. There's less than half of a point in terms of the converted grade difference for him. Both of those are hovering around that 7.00 mark. But as we kind of know, shouldn't come as a surprise, Aaron Brewer's a little bit of a smaller center. So when they're asking him to block one-on-one, so this is typically going to be your 5-0 protections where each offensive lineman is responsible for a specific defensive player. He does not grade as well there, coming in at a 2.74, and that's something that you can usually avoid, but one of those things that, as good as Aaron Brewer is, this is something that you want to avoid him doing when you can. As we get over into the run blocking side of things, overall grade for run blocking is 7.13, but there's some interesting context in the grades here. When we look at his zone blocking, so whether it's outside zone or inside zone, I include duo with inside zone. Not everybody does that. But one of the things that is, I guess, eye-opening here is that Aaron Brewer is a lot better going to his left in zone blocks than he is to the right. So in his outside zone to the left, comes in a great 9.66, and then his inside zone and duo to the left, he's at a 7.65. But when we flip those and we're going to the right, his outside zone drops by 3.4 points down to a 6.17, and his inside zone duo to the right drops similarly down to a 4.18. So I don't know exactly why the difference is there. Maybe it comes down to the guards that he's working with. Sometimes that can be a factor. But for whatever reason, Aaron Brewer is performing better this season moving to his left than he is to the right. The gap and power stuff, probably been less of that than what you might think given some of the narratives there. So don't want to put too much weight on the grades there, but has not been great in those scenarios either. Uh, did not have enough going to the right that I would really consider sharing a grade. Going to the left had 22 snaps, and that comes in at his lowest grade of a 3.55. So again, not something I think would be a huge surprise when we're talking about Aaron Brewer. That given his size and what he does well, not performing as well in the gap and power schemes, performing better in the zone schemes, especially the outside zone schemes, but interesting to note that he is much better going to the left this year than he is going to his right. Next player is going to be right guard Cole Strange. His overall grade is a 3.42, obviously below average and not nearly good enough. There's been a lot of criticism of Cole Strange recently, and I think that most of that is very warranted. When we look at his pass blocking, he comes in at a 3.72. And like I said, not everything is going to get enough to talk about an individual grade for each of the different concepts. But one of the things that we do see is that when protection is slid to Cole Strange's side, so when we're getting slide right protections, whether it's a half slide, three-quarter slide, full slide, he's only at a 2.87, right? So that's worse than his overall pass blocking. And when they are sliding protection to the left, so mostly the half slide protections to the left, he's even worse at a 1.47. So both of those are coming in below his overall pass blocking reps, which means that some of the other stuff like your play action passes where he might not have enough in those individual concepts to really talk about separately here are bringing his grade up some, but in terms of just regular pass blocking, has not been good at all, whether protection is being slid to him or away from him. And then the run blocking is even worse for Cole Strange. His overall run block grade is a 3.00. And nothing, well, I don't want to say nothing, right? The one thing that he is doing at average or a little better than average is his backside of outside zone blocking at a 5.59. So that's going to be outside zone to the left. Play is typically going outside of the tackle there. Sometimes it can cut back, but that is the one area in the run game that he's doing at least okay. When he's on the front side of outside zone, he's down to a 3.41. And then his inside zone and duo, front side 1.59, backside is the worst of 0.45. So there's not a lot here to talk about with Cole Strange that he is doing well. His grade, as we get into Jonah, you're going to see is similar, but at the same time, I think that they are doing a lot more in the plays they're calling to protect Cole Strange and Larry Borum than they are to protect that left side of the line. So just a little bit of context there to keep in mind. Cole Strange, I guess, moving forward, has that three position versatility, has some experience at the center, and now that he is familiar with the scheme, might be somebody to consider for, I don't know, maybe your seventh or eighth offensive lineman on the roster, but would not necessarily be the first guy that I want coming off the bench. But he does have some value, but he should not be somebody that you're looking at as a long-term starter. This is more of a stopgap guy, and that's exactly how he's performing. As we get into Jonas Savaianaya, there's going to be, I don't want to call them excuses, but there's going to be a lot of different stuff that we talk about here. So his overall grade comes in at a 2.8, which is lower than what Cole Strange has. He had a really rough start to the season. I think that we're seeing improvement from Jonah that we're not seeing from Cole Strange. Jonah has been very up and down throughout the season, but as you look at the peaks and the valleys of those grades, the peaks are getting higher and so are the valleys. So there's kind of an upward trend if you look at that line of his grades. And I think that we're going to continue to see that. Pass blocking comes in again lower than Cole Strange. Jonah is at a 2.61. But again, context here. When there is sliding protection to Jonah's side, he's almost average at a 4.66. And I think that is important because I've said before that without having to cover up for the right side, the Dolphins could have slid a lot more protections to that left side and could have given Jonah the help that they thought that they were going to give him. But due to the issues on the right side, they've had to slide more to that side. And that kind of shows up in the ratio of protections that are slid to their side versus when they're single blocking. So, Jonah probably has, I don't know, 20% more where he is blocking single, where Cole Strange, on the other hand, is probably 5% more that he is getting help versus not getting help. So, even though they haven't played the same number of snaps, we're looking at 600 for Jonah, 436 for Cole Strange in terms of graded snaps. Of those pass plays, Jonah is getting help less often than what Cole Strange is. And that has really hurt Jonah because he comes in at a 0 for his single blocking in pass protection. That's obviously not good. Not going to sit here and defend that. I do think it is getting better. We haven't seen the bad losses over the past couple of weeks that we saw early in the season, but he hasn't done good enough to bring that up into a gradable performance yet overall. But again, if the Dolphins could have slid protection to his side, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Another thing of note is that we've seen Jonah being used pulling in pass protection more often than Cole Strange. These numbers may not be exact, but you're talking about roughly 4 times as more that Jonah is being asked to pull across the line of scrimmage. So Jonah pulling from the left side over to the right versus Strange pulling from the right to the left in pass protection. The volumes are low enough for both of them. Not going to really go into the individual grades, but just thinking about the play calling and how they have a little more confidence in Jonah despite the lower grade in my system. Still seems like the team is high on Jonah in that sense. Going over to the run blocking side of things, so Jonah is a little bit higher than Cole Strange, coming at a 3.1 for run blocking. Again, not good enough, but where Cole Strange has a bunch of really bad stuff and one thing that's okay, um, Jonah doesn't have anything that has gotten above average yet, but he's got a few things that are kind of pushing up that way. His front side of outside zone blocking is at 4.25, so not great, not even average yet, but it isn't that far from it. Backside is a 3.44. That obviously needs to get a little better. Hasn't been as good on the inside zone and duo stuff. When he's on the backside of that, he is close to average at a 4.45. But his front side, which is kind of surprising with him being more of a the wide body power type player, and also his gap in power, like we're talking about near zero grades for those. So far in the run game, Jonah has been much better being on the front side of outside zones than he really has at anything else. But again, right, talking about that trend, I think that if we revisit this at the end of the season, which we definitely will, I think we're going to see a lot of these different concepts trending upwards, and that at least some of these are going to get to above average grades. And that, hopefully by the end of the season, his overall grade is somewhere near average, and that as we move into next year, we can start to see the above average player that we thought we were getting when we traded up for him. But for now, right, Jonah still has a lot of room to improve. Next, we are going to get into the tackle, starting with Larry Borum. So his overall grade is close to average. It's a 4.75. But like we talked about with Cole Strange, that's been very aided by the play calling. And that really shows up in his pass protection. Overall grade 7.05. But when we look at how often protection is slid to him versus slid away from him, he's almost even in terms of when he's, protection is slid his way and protection is slid away. Whereas as we get into Patrick Paul has a lot more opportunities where protection is slid away from him. When protection is slid to the right, so half slides, three-quarter slides, full slides, Larry Borum's doing well, 8.44, and you really should. Like if you are a tackle and the only thing you have to worry about is the outside because you have Cole Strange sliding to the right, then you should grade well. And Larry is. Like nothing to complain about there. And then when protection is slid to the left, so he is essentially left one on one. I don't grade whether they're getting help from tight ends or running backs. So that's not really factored in here, but we're talking about half slides, three-quarter slides to the left. He's a little below average at a 4.34. So that's a pretty significant drop off, a 4.1 drop off in the grade from protection being slid to him and protection being slid away from him. As we move over to the run game side of it, kind of disappointing here. I think that the move from Kendall Lamb to Larry Borum had a lot to do with what you hoped you get in the run game. And maybe this just says more about how bad Kendall Lamb was in the run game last year. But overall grade for Larry Borum is a 2.84. So a good bit below average. The one thing that he has been doing well is playing on the backside of outside zone. Um, so basically usually chasing something down and cutting it off. Front side of outside zone has been very bad for Larry Borum. He's below a zero. It's a 78.57 is his raw grade on the front side of outside zone plays. Inside zone and duo, not great there either. On the front side of it is a 1.56. Backside, a little below average at a 4.81, but not nearly good enough. His gap and power scheme stuff also all the way down to a zero. And then when he's pulling, we've seen them doing this a little more with the crack tosses to his side. So he's been doing it more. I only have 11 of them on the season, but he hasn't been great at it. We're at a 0.61 on those 11 plays. And maybe, as volume increases, we could see that get a little better. All right, that's when you're talking about 11 times doing it and the raw grade is a 9.5. It doesn't take much to get that a little bit higher, but he has not been good at pretty much anything, right? Like when we're sliding protection to him in pass protection and when he's on the backside of outside zone are the two things that he's doing well, and nothing else is even up to an average offensive lineman. So, Larry Borum, I don't want to say too much bad about him because when you get to an overall grade of a 4.75, that I think is what you would hope to get out of your backup swing tackle. But similar to Cole Strange, this is not a guy that really wanted to have out there for, what's it been now? 8, 9, 10 games, right? This is more of a 2, 3 game stopgap type player. So not blaming it on Larry as much, but would not look forward to him moving forward as a starter in this system. And then that's going to bring us to the finale of Patrick Paul, and probably one of the ones that everybody wanted to hear about the most. So his overall grade of a 6.8 is a little bit lower than Aaron Brewer, but like we talked about at the top of this, the centers tend to grade a little better in this system. If I had to talk about one player that, if there was one lineman that I felt was irreplaceable on this line, it would absolutely be Patrick Paul, even though he has a slightly lower grade. His pass blocking is where he has really been shining. So we talked about earlier about how you can have a perfect grade without a perfect raw grade, right? So that highest grade was a 98.21 to get a 10.0, and his pass blocking is just above that at 98.29. So he has a perfect 10 in overall pass blocking. And most of that, well, not most of it, right? Part of it goes to when protection is slid to his side. He is near perfect. Out of 97 graded plays, he has a raw grade of a 96. So that is good enough to get a perfect grade in pass protection when it slid his way. But like we talked about with Borum, you should be good when you're doing that. Where Patrick Paul has really been shining this year, where he's really making the difference, is when protection is slid away from him and he is essentially, not that he won't get help, right? You can have times that a running back or a tight end helps him out, but this is slide right protection, so half slides, 3/4 slides. We're leaving Patrick Paul on the backside. On 135 snaps with that, he is grading in an 8.48. Right? If you remember with Larry Borum, he was down to a 4.34. So you're talking about him performing twice as good almost as Larry Borum in single pass protection, and as well as Patrick Paul is doing with that is a big reason why the Dolphins can afford to help on the right side. It is coming at the detriment of Jonas Savaiinaya, but if you had Patrick Paul even performing close to average in pass protection, then the performance of this group would be much worse overall. So, great job by Patrick Paul in pass protection. Now, when we get over to the run blocking side of it, there is still room to improve for Patrick Paul. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he is a perfect prospect at this point. The talent is there, the athletic ability is there, but the execution still has a little left to be desired. His run blocking grade overall comes in at a 3.87. He has been very good at inside zone and duo, averaging out to about a 7.00 when you're talking about front side and backside of inside zone and duo. His outside zone has not been as good. So front side of outside zone on 42 graded plays has a grade of a 1.73. So not nearly good enough for what are asking for a tackle in this Mike McDaniel outside zone heavy offense. Backside, almost average at a 4.99. Again, this is mostly cutoff block, stuff like that. And low volumes, but gap, power, pulling, right, still not nearly good enough. Grading, near a 0 on those, but a lot of that comes down to opportunities. I think that Patrick Paul is a player, the more often that he does this stuff, the better that he is going to get. And he's still a very young player. So if he can continue what he's doing in the pass game and then continue to develop his techniques in the run game, then we're going to be looking at should be a Pro Bowl player this year and going to be creeping up into all pro status here, hopefully in the not too distant future. All right, so this has been a lot of talking for me. I hope you guys are still hanging in there. But that wraps up the sharing of the grades for the 5 offensive linemen. As you can see, our left tackle and center are performing very well. Right tackle, with help, is performing about average, and we're not getting nearly good enough with the two guards. As we move forward in the season, I'm really looking forward to Austin Jackson getting back into the lineup. I'm looking forward to seeing two tackles and a center that are grading above average, because I think that's where Austin Jackson is going to be, and how that affects the guards as well. I think that when you have a little bit of extra help with the tackles, then that can raise the performance of the guards more than a good guard can raise a mediocre tackle. So I think that getting Austin Jackson back is more important than James Daniels, although obviously I'd like to get both of them back eventually. But I also think that, even though Larry Borum and Austin Jackson are similar in terms of the issues they have in pass protection, I think you're going to see a boost in the run game. Austin Jackson is probably even better than Patrick Paul at this point when he's healthy, when it comes to outside zone blocking to his side. So that could be a piece of the offense that is unlocked more than what it has been this year when Austin Jackson is back in the lineup. And it'll be interesting to see what they do in terms of pass protection, if they keep feeling like they need to give as much help to the right side, or if they can start to give a little more help to Jonah and let him be a rookie rather than asking him to be the number 3 player on this offensive line ahead of Cole Strange and Larry Borum. So as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this content. Leave some questions below, leave some comments. If you have anything for that Wednesday question and answer, leave that in the comments below as well, and we will address that on Wednesday. And as always, we will talk again soon.
Thank you. Trace, and back over to Achane again. I believe he's got a first down.
Make up for a lot of mistakes.
First and 10 after an 11-yard pass play to Achane.